heard lots of reporting. The Washington Post had a rundown of the kind of chaos in the system, the web outages, the phones ringing off the hook, the offices understaffed. Are you hearing this just first person as a senator from constituents? Are you getting this in your offices about what is happening to this program?
Yes, we are hearing it everywhere. And understand the personal toll that we're talking about for these folks. More than half of the people who receive Social Security count on it to put groceries on the table and keep a roof over their heads. We're talking about people in their 70s, in their 80s, in their 90s, people who often have mobility challenges, people who struggle. And what's happening right now at the Social Security office is they're saying, in effect, nobody really to answer the phones. So that means you've got to find somebody to get you down to a Social Security office. Oh, whoops. They closed that Social Security office, so you've got to travel, what, 2 hours, 3 hours to be able to get to another Social Security office. When you get there, we're hearing about lines that are 50 people long with 2 people in the Social Security office to try to help answer questions. Office closes before people even have an opportunity to get up and ask their questions. And that is repeated over and over. And understand this, Social Security is not charity. It is not some giveaway. It is something that people earned throughout all of their working years on a promise from America that said you pay into that system, and then when you retire, you can count on those benefits solid. They will be there for you. And instead, what Elon Musk and Donald Trump, our co-presidents, are doing right now is effectively cutting the benefits that people were promised, and they are making people suffer all across this country. It is wrong.
Yeah, well, maybe some of them should find a billionaire as a son-in-law, and they can be fine. They won't have to worry about the check. That would help them out. Did you get any sense from Mr. Bisignano today that he would exert any independent control over this, that he would be responsive, or do you see him as essentially a kind of DOGE stooge apparatchik?
You know, look, I raised the question directly. I pointed out the places where if you make enough cuts in service, you have effectively cut the benefits. And we all know you can't cut those Social Security benefits without coming right here to Congress. Right. Only Congress can cut the benefits. But you can backdoor cut them. And he admitted that. Yeah, that is the law. And so cutting, for example, the number of people who work at the Social Security Administration can turn out to be effectively a cut in benefits. So I said, will you at least commit to rehiring the people who've been cut? Get Social Security back up to the level at least where it was. Frankly, still wasn't enough, but at least where it was. And all we heard is blah, blah, blah, I'll think about it. But he did not make that commitment. And why? Because he is in league with Donald Trump and with Elon Musk to cut Social Security for millions of people across this country who depend on it, the millions of people who don't have a billionaire son-in-law.
You know, one of the most unnerving stories we see in the first 2 months is the use of this agency as a sort of weaponized political tool against citizens. I want to just ask you about this because there was this story in Maine where basically the governor of Maine challenged the president on one of his executive orders. They had a kind of, testy exchange in the White House. And then subsequently, Maine found out that the program that automatically enrolls your newborn in the hospital with a Social Security number had been terminated with no notice. And you now had to go with your newborn to an office to get that Social Security number. And it looked like it was a reprisal. And now we have confirmation. The man who's running Social Security, Leland Dudek, who's sort of the DOGE officer there, said he had ordered the move to cancel this after watching Janet Mills, Maine's Democratic governor, clash with Mr. Trump at the White House. I was ticked at the governor of Maine for not being real cordial to the president, Mr. Dudek said. And then he said that he owned it and he was, he was sorry and he won't do it again. But I am astonished this happened. And do you have any confidence it won't happen again?
No, I do not have confidence it won't happen again because it is the mindset of the Trump administration. And that is that this government is to be run for a handful of billionaires and people with power, and everyone else can just eat dirt. That is the view of the Trump administration. We're feeling it right now in the Social Security administration, but we're feeling it everywhere that Elon Musk goes with his magic chainsaw to fire people, to do it in ugly ways, to undermine the kind of obligations that we have passed here in Congress, to get rid of the consumer agency, to try to shut down the Department of Education. And why? It is all in service to government that works better for the rich and the powerful. This is all leading toward the Republicans, Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the Republicans here in Congress, who want to push through a big tax giveaway that's going to cost $4.7 billion, go mostly to billionaires and billionaire corporations, and they want to pay for it on the backs of seniors, on the backs of little kids, on the backs of people with disabilities, on the backs of veterans, on the backs of just hardworking people all across this country. That is the ultimate battle. And this story at Social Security right now is just the most visible picture of what's going on.
Final quick question for you, someone who served on the Armed Services Committee, given what we know about this group chat leak and the Secretary of Defense texting war plans out on unsecured channels to a journalist, do you think Pete Hegseth, as Secretary of Defense, should resign?
If Pete Hegseth had even a sliver of self-respect and sense of honor, he would have already put his resignation on the president's desk. And if he's not willing to do that, then the president of the United States has a moral and, in my view, legal obligation to fire him.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
Still ahead, as Donald Trump continues the legal pillars of civil society from the Trump administration, including a series of executive orders that harass and target specific named law firms. And then over the weekend, Trump expanded his attack to encompass pretty much any lawyer or firm he doesn't like. In a presidential memorandum, he directed his attorney general to seek sanctions against attorneys and law firms who engage in frivolous, unreasonable, and vexatious litigation against the United States. Noted that lawyers and law firms that engage in actions that violate the laws of the U.S. or rules governing attorney conduct must be efficiently and effectively held accountable. There was only one lawyer actually named in that memo, someone who spent decades working alongside Democrats, challenging Republican efforts to suppress voter turnout. Mark Elias, who founded the Elias Law Group and Democracy Docket, who was named in that, joins me now. Mark, it's good to have you. And first, I just got to ask about what we've seen, the targeted attacks on Perkins Coie, then Paul Weiss, Jenner and Block, I think today, specific firms basically saying the federal government's going to ban them from federal buildings. It's going to go after them, going after you as well. Like, what does this add up to? How significant is this?
I think this is incredibly significant. Right now, the only thing that is standing between Donald Trump and his authoritarian dreams are the courts. We will eventually have elections, and those will stand in his way as well. But right now, it is primarily the courts. And every night you report on this case and that case. And what is really going on is Donald Trump is losing. Donald Trump's administration is losing case after case. And in order for that to happen, you need to have lawyers who are willing to litigate aggressively against the administration. So what Donald Trump is doing is he is trying to intimidate the largest law firms to prevent them from being willing to take on cases adverse to the administration, trying to intimidate individual lawyers to prevent them from being willing to step forward and take these cases. And in doing that, he hopes to bring the legal industry to heel, maybe even get them to do a little bit of his bidding, which looks like one law firm may have agreed to do. But I have a message, at least for myself, it's not going to work. And I think I speak for lots of other lawyers in saying that I wear his scorn like a badge of honor.
So you just spoke about elections, and today we have a new executive order, which, again, it's a little hard to characterize these things because what it's purporting to say it does is just plainly unconstitutional, unlawful. It's an executive order to essentially, by decree, centralize election administration, require a whole bunch of new forms of election checking, and basically put it in the hands of Donald Trump unilaterally with no law being passed and against the existing laws in the existing jurisdictions. What do you make of this new EO?
Yeah, it's wildly unconstitutional and illegal. Let's just start with that. It has no more of the force of law than you and I, Chris, agreeing now that the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, right? It is a fever dream that Donald Trump has, because the one consistent thing in all of Donald Trump's efforts has been election denialism. It is the only thing that is uncompromising in his administration. It's the thing that's consistent. It's the reason why he hates me, because I was successful in litigating against him and his campaign. But what this executive order tries to do is to claim that he has this power to control how elections that are run. He has the power to contravene Congress. He has the power to overrule states. By the way, he also kicks in that he's giving DOGE subpoena power, which is kind of a nice little sideline for him. Perhaps he'll give Mr. Musk something to do. But the fact is that the Constitution is very clear that the ability to regulate the time, place, and manner of elections rests with the states, and it can be overridden by Congress. Congress, not the president. Congress, and Congress has passed laws that are enforced, and the president simply has no authority.
This was something that struck me today. Adrian Fontes, who's the Attorney General in Arizona, Democrat, telling Democracy Docket, it looks like the Trump administration, through this order, is setting up a scenario that will be impossible to meet, meaning a set of requirements. I think they want to cancel the 2026 elections, a very, very serious problem for the USA. I want to be clear here. I don't want people to sort of catastrophize or panic about this, but it does seem to me that for all the power grabs we've seen in the first 2 months, none of them specifically have been about elections until now. And given everything they've done in every other domain, we have to anticipate they will do everything in their power to essentially make it not possible to have a free and fair election.
Yeah, I think you put your finger right on it, Chris, and you have been excellent on all of these issues in the last few weeks in distinguishing the panic that is warranted from the panic that is not. And so I think you got it exactly right. It is not that we will not have elections. I believe we will have elections. It is whether those are free and fair elections. And what I need everyone to do is imagine what Donald Trump was like the last time he was president, and what we saw Republican states willing to do when he was president, and what his Department of Justice and administration was willing to do in the run-up to 2020 and in the post-election of 2020. Now I want you to imagine how much crazier, how much more craven, how much more unhinged Donald Trump is now. And that is the shift that we are going to see in the attacks from his administration and his sycophants on our election processes in 2025 and 2026. I already said that my law firm and we will litigate and sue over the executive order he took today. I expect there's going to be a lot of litigation in the coming weeks and months. But it is important that everyone recognize that while the courts are holding Donald Trump in check now, the thing that he fears more than anything else is losing elections. It is the thing that he hates more than anything else, and that will be the big test come 2026.
Mark Elias, who is, as you can see, unbowed. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Not,
Yes.
I think, in his profession, but more widely as well. Really impressive and chilling. Thanks, my friend.
You bet.
And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Really happy to have you here. This was Philadelphia today, a protest to defend the EPA. Honk if you love clean water. This was Duluth, Minnesota today, another big turnout of people protesting to stand up for the EPA. This was Chicago, Illinois today. More people out defending the EPA. It was a big protest today in Chicago. Good signs, lots of people. It was a picket and a protest. This sign says, factories today emit 1,500,000 tons less toxic air pollution than in 1990. Protect EPA workers, protect your family's health. I don't know who this person is at the Chicago protest, but may I commend you on excellent punctuation and grammar on that perfectly spelled sign. It's all perfect, A+. Also a very good point. This was Washington, D.C. today, yet more people coming out to defend the U.S. Post Office. We saw a bunch of protests, people defending the post office last week. Then we saw just a huge number of protests for the post office this weekend. Now, today in Washington, D.C., people came out to say, hands off the post office. USPS belongs to us. This protest was based around rural letter carriers, people who deliver the mail in rural America. You see the signs there at the protest today in Washington. Rural America relies on the Postal Service. Also a good point, and very true. If Donald Trump is going to effectively abolish the post office like he says he wants to, or privatize it like Elon Musk says he wants to, rural states will absolutely take the worst of it by a mile, which itself is going to be really interesting for rural red state Republicans in Washington trying to justify that to their constituents. Yesterday, we saw marches to support immigrants in San Francisco, California, and in El Paso, Texas, including members of the clergy in El Paso. In South Carolina, pro-Trump Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace has been refusing to meet with her constituents in the 1st Congressional District in South Carolina in the Low Country. A new local group called the Low Country Accountability Alliance has invited her to do a town hall with her constituents in her district this week on Friday. It does not appear that she is inclined to do that. In the meantime, they have put up these billboards in her district, "Show your face, Mace," and "Missing Nancy Mace last seen dodging constituents." That's happening in South Carolina. In Georgia, in Savannah, where constituents of Republican Congressman Buddy Carter have been protesting and demanding that he talk to them in an in-person town hall with his constituents. Last night, Congressman Buddy Carter instead opted to do a town hall by telephone. He might have thought that might have kept it a more low-profile event, but alas, more than 10,000 people called in.
Across Georgia this morning, a Savannah representative faced more than 10,000 people during a telephone town hall. Yesterday, Congressman Buddy Carter answered their questions, and that was after voters protested outside of Carter's office in Savannah about 2 weeks ago, asking for an in-person meeting. The Republican representative was on the phone answering questions from voters, and a big topic for a lot of them was Social Security and benefits for older Americans. The congressman says there is no risk of those programs going away.
No risk? Really, Congressman Carter? Really, no risk at all? We'll be back to that point in a moment. But in Kentucky, we reported last night on Republican Congressman Andy Barr not showing up to a town hall that his own constituents held in Lexington in his name. Even though he wouldn't come, they held it as a people's town hall at the beautiful Kentucky Theater in downtown Lexington, Kentucky. They completely filled the place and then some. But Congressman Andy Barr did not show up. Instead, he, like Congressman Buddy Carter in Georgia, Andy Barr in Kentucky, also opted to do a telephone town hall instead of meeting with people in person. That apparently, according to local news reports, had its ups and downs.
Nothing is more American than Kentucky bourbon. President Trump is fighting for American whiskey, so it is the first choice among consumers everywhere.
Some callers say they are worried about government security.
None of us voted for a South African billionaire to come and rummage through our private, financial, and health information.
In response, Congressman Barr says Elon Musk is an American and reminded listeners of the democratic process.
And for anyone who thinks that there are threats to democracy, just consider that 77 million Americans elected this president and this agenda. I would argue that that is democracy.
So you vote for one guy, you get the other guy. That is democracy. Ta-da! Jeez. And as for Kentucky bourbon, guess which country is the #1 export market for Kentucky? Oh, Canada, where they are taking Kentucky bourbon off the shelves, where they are experiencing a patriotic upsurge of Canadians promising to never again buy Kentucky bourbon because of Donald Trump and his genius tariff idea and his constant threats that he's going to go to war with Canada to annex them as the 51st state. So, yeah, you know, go Kentucky Republicans. Good luck. I see why you might not want to talk to your constituents in person anytime soon. So there's a lot going on today. And I have to say, this is one of those days in the news that just evoked like one spit take after another. I felt like all day long I was like, do whoop. You said, do whoop, what? I mean, just a sampling. Amid all the actual scientific research that Donald Trump is attacking and ending, including like cutting off clinical trials for cancer treatments for veterans at the VA. I mean, all the stuff like that he is cutting. Trump is ordering up one new study for the federal government to do. The Washington Post reports exclusively tonight that Donald Trump has tapped a fake doctor to head up this new national study. It is a study of just how terrible vaccines really are. And he and his administration have tapped to run this study a man who is not a scientist and not a doctor, but he was disciplined in the state of Maryland more than a decade ago for practicing medicine without a license. They are decimating the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control, which together have given us basically every single major medical advance in humankind in the last 40 years plus. And instead, they're now hiring cranks off the internet to tell us how bad science is and how you shouldn't get vaccinated. It's just amazing. Trump today unveiled yet another executive order targeting another major law firm for destruction because he thinks this is how he can make sure that people will stop going to court to try to stop him from doing things that are illegal. In particular, I think he also hopes that these kinds of attacks mean that no good big law firms will represent the people and the entities that he goes after on his enemies list. I mean, this is just the latest in a series of these that he has done. I will just say, and, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I spend a lot of time talking to lawyers and talking about stuff going on in the American judicial system. America's big-time lawyers and big-time law firms have spent a lot of time in the past few years gazing lovingly at themselves in the mirror, telling themselves what great patriots they are, right? Congratulating themselves on the proud history and standards of their profession. Right? The best lawyers and best law firms in the country have been telling these inspiring tales for years now about how brave they will definitely be when the country needs the rule of law to stand. It needs the courts to stand. It needs good lawyers to stand up to authoritarianism and save the democracy. Y'all have been telling yourself a very pretty story about your own patriotism and bravery for a long time now. Well, time's up. Now is the time to actually show it. Now is the time to actually show us all that you are the person who you told us you would be, that you are the profession that you told us you would be, that you will uphold the standards that you've been so proud of and crowing about so much for the last few years. In our new authoritarian system, the country's most powerful law firms right now are getting picked off one by one because, so far at least, they won't get together and stand together to say they're not going to take it. And they're not going to let this happen to any lawyer, to any law firm, to the legal profession, which the country needs in order to fight to retain the rule of law. American lawyers and law firms have been telling themselves that they're going to do great in this moment when it comes. This moment is here. And they are so far not proving themselves up to their own legend. Time is short to turn that around. You're depending on it as a profession. You're depending on it as individuals. Your businesses are depending on it, but the country is depending on it too. This is not the time to get small. To underscore the point, the Republican Speaker of the House today said that he and the Republican-led Congress may start abolishing federal courts. They may start defunding federal district courts, thereby abolishing them. Sound like a good idea for our three co-equal branches of government to have one just abolish the other? Anybody home? Big law? Anybody? Trump signed another executive order tonight on elections, which, among other things, demands that all states hand over their voter rolls to Donald Trump's top campaign donor, Elon Musk, because Elon Musk will, I don't know, fix the voting rolls or something. Sound good? Like I'm telling you, it has been a day. You know, at one of the big protests at Tesla dealerships this weekend, at the one in Chicago, this caught my eye. A Getty photographer caught this sign at the Chicago protest: "Go steal data from Mars." As all these things come to fruition, and each new day comes to pass in this administration. What they are doing with our data, data security, their handling of sensitive information, has turned into the big populist issue of this administration, and it's turned into just a scandal-generating machine that we are seeing the fruits of every single day. I mean, we probably should have seen it coming with Trump in his first term, taking all the classified documents from his first term and stashing them in his bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, right, including classified documents concerning nuclear weapons. That was probably a hint that this was not going to go well in any second term. We should have seen it coming probably at the very beginning of his first term when he invited Russian government officials and a Russian media outlet into the Oval Office, and then he, surprise, gave them code word level classified information on ongoing covert operations by Israel. Yeah, we should have seen that this was going to be one of the problems that we were going to be dealing with on a daily basis. But now we've got, it's every day. We've got him very thoroughly doxing hundreds of people, including his own lawyer, by inexplicably personally insisting that those people's full unredacted Social Security numbers, birth dates, and birthplaces should be included unredacted in his release of otherwise basically worthless John F. Kennedy assassination files. Why did he insist on that? We still don't know, but he did it. And now they're apparently getting new Social Security numbers. Good luck on the 1-800 number, waiting to get through to take care of that. We've had random kids who work for Elon Musk rifling through personnel files in the U.S. government, and individual Americans' tax records and health information and hospitalization records and credit card and banking information. It's been a real treat. The American people really like this idea. Yeah, go steal data from Mars, why don't you? Get out. NPR reports today that last week, all Defense Department personnel received an advisory warning them that they should not use the app Signal even for unclassified information, not because of the security of Signal as an app per se, but because, quote, Russian professional hacking groups were targeting Signal users with phishing attacks. That was last week. That followed a Defense Department instruction from 2 years ago in 2023 that reminded Defense Department personnel that Signal should not be used. It could not be used for any non-public Defense Department information. Nevertheless, Signal, of course, is the app on which Donald Trump's hand-picked defense secretary led a robust and detailed group chat about forthcoming military strikes in Yemen. Recall for a moment that in his infinite wisdom, Donald Trump chose for defense secretary a Fox News weekend host who faced allegations of philandering and serious alcohol abuse, including many, many alleged instances of drinking on the job. Pete Hegseth, of course, denied those allegations, and oh, he looked so good doing it with his American flag handkerchief stuffed into his pocket in case he needed to wipe his nose. And so Donald Trump stood by him and his chiseled jaw for the job, and so he got the job, and now here he is, Pete Hegseth, confidently typing out with his thumbs that we are, quote, currently clean on OPSEC, while he was texting on Signal, reportedly about specific U.S. weapons systems, named human targets, and the sequencing and exact timing of the battle plan for forthcoming U.S. airstrikes abroad, with a group of people that included the vice president, the CIA director, the director of national intelligence, the White House chief of staff, the Treasury secretary for some reason, the secretary of state, and also a random journalist who they appear to have added to the chat by mistake, but nobody noticed he was there because apparently nobody looked, because we're clean on OPSEC. Today at a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing, CIA Director John Ratcliffe told one senator, Democrat John Ossoff of Georgia, that this was not a mistake. Was this a mistake, sir? No. Oh, I guess this was all on purpose? We will speak with Senator John Ossoff about that in just a moment. But I mean, here we are, less than a week away from the news. This is less than a week after the news that Pete Hegseth apparently had planned a briefing in the most secure briefing room in the Pentagon, a briefing on the nation's most classified operational war plans for a war against China. He had planned a highest level, highest security Pentagon briefing on those super secret plans for a pro-China U.S. businessman with billions of dollars in debt to China and huge business interest in that country. who also happens to be the top campaign donor to the president. That plan was apparently only busted up at the last moment when the New York Times reported on it, which I guess embarrassed them too much to go forward with it, but Pete Hegseth had been planning on doing it. That was Friday. This Signal group chat revelation was Monday, right? I mean, things are rapidly disintegrating here. Also, I mean, what do we do with the fact that mishandling classified information in this way is very clearly a crime? I mean, do we expect the FBI will be all over that? I mean, this stuff is criminal. It's not keeping nuclear secrets in the Mar-a-Lago bathroom level of crime, but it's a crime. I mean, Jeffrey Goldberg, the journalist who was apparently accidentally included on this Signal chain, this group text, says that among the things CIA Director John Ratcliffe personally volunteered to this Signal group chat, he put in writing to this group chat on this commercial app. Among the things he posted there was the name of an undercover serving CIA officer, an active intelligence officer who Goldberg says was serving undercover. Chris Coons, Democratic senator from Delaware, responded to these revelations by saying, quote, every single one of the government officials on this text chain have now committed a crime, even if accidentally, that would normally involve a jail sentence. Senator Ruben Gallego, a Marine veteran, responded this way, quote, amateur hour. These are the geniuses that are also selling out Ukraine and destroying our alliances all around the world. No wonder Putin is embarrassing them at the negotiation table. Now, actually, to that point, it would appear that one person who was a participant in the group chat on Signal, it would appear that one of them physically was in Moscow. It looks like he was maybe even inside the Kremlin while he was on this text group chat with these geniuses, among other things, reportedly naming an undercover CIA officer and debating very specific information about forthcoming military strikes. Quote, during the group discussion on Signal, Goldberg reported, CIA Director John Ratcliffe named an active CIA intelligence officer in the chat at 5:24 p.m. Eastern Time. That was just after midnight in Russia. Trump diplomatic envoy Steve Witkoff's flight did not leave Moscow until around 2 a.m. local time. A former Putin advisor who is still close to Putin said in a Telegram post that, in fact, Witkoff and Putin were meeting at the Kremlin until 1:30 a.m. Steve, did you keep your phone with you while you were in Russia? Did you keep your phone with you while you were in the Kremlin? Was your phone turned on? What could possibly go wrong? We're supposed to not worry, though, right? Because these guys are so savvy. They are so tough. They're New York real estate tough. This was the same trip to Moscow in which Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's real estate friend, came back to the United States and told a heartwarming tale of how Vladimir Putin had given him a painting. Oh, a painting of Donald Trump, which Putin had made for Trump personally. And Steve Witkoff hand-carried that painting from Russia back to the United States and brought it to the White House and gave it to Donald Trump. Did anybody check that painting? Anybody, give it a close going over? Steve Witkoff did an interview with the pro-Russia ex-Fox News host Tucker Carlson in which he gushed about how much he, quote, likes Putin. He said, quote, I thought he was straight up with me. He said it was, quote, gracious of Putin to accept me, to see me in Moscow. He said, quote, I don't regard Putin as a bad guy. This is our negotiator. This is the quality of tough guy genius the United States is bringing to the table for these supposedly tough guy negotiations with the Russians to end the war in Ukraine, right? How's that going? Well, let's see. Let's just do a little math. So far, since Trump has been back in office, and since these negotiations have gotten underway, the tough guy negotiations, but being tough with Russia, get them to stop the war in Ukraine. So far, Trump has offered a few concessions in He's announced that the U.S. is no longer enforcing foreign agents law in this country. He's announced that the U.S. is shutting down all of our anti-foreign influence operations at the Justice Department and the FBI. He's announced that the U.S. is shutting down our so-called klepto capture efforts to enforce sanctions versus Russia and stop them from evading sanctions. Trump has talked about ending sanctions altogether against Russia. Trump has said he wants Russia to rejoin the G7. Last week, we learned that Trump has cut off the program that tracks the Ukrainian children that Russia kidnapped and took into Russian territory. Trump is effectively telling Russia, hey, congratulations, you can keep the kids. Trump has restarted diplomatic relations with Russia and said that Russia will soon be reopening their embassy and all their U.S. consulates at full strength in the United States. Trump shut down U.S. Cyber Command operations against Russia. He shut down our joint efforts with Europe to counteract Russian sabotage efforts in Europe, which thus far have included multiple arson attacks, an attempted assassination, and packing letter bombs onto international flights. We're no longer working with our friends in Europe to try to stop those things. Russia has reportedly asked for the U.S. to restart direct commercial flights between Moscow and the United States. Trump hasn't said a word about that, but do you think he'll say no? And now today, Trump says, quote, the United States will help restore Russia's access to the world market for agricultural and fertilizer exports. The United States will assist Russia in obtaining lower maritime insurance costs. And the United States will assist Russia in enhancing their access to ports and payment systems for such transactions. So that's so far what Trump has given up to Russia. But hey, I mean, it's a negotiation, right? What did he get in exchange? Well, there's no ceasefire or end to the war in Ukraine. But yesterday, while those tough guy talks were underway in Saudi Arabia, Russia did happily shoot a bunch of missiles into Ukraine while the talks were actively underway. And Trump did get a painting. We are not dealing with the sharpest tools in the shed here at any level. We, in fact, appear to be dealing with very profoundly dull tools. But it's our national security that they're destroying, not theirs. And the American people are wise to it, which means if this system still works, it should make all of this politically unsustainable. We've got Social Security news ahead tonight. We've got Senator Jon Ossoff here live. Stay with us.
Constituent not get his payment in February. They went to his bank account and tried to claw back previous payments from January and December. And then what did he do? He had to go down to the building in Seattle, the federal building that you're trying to close, and stand in line for hours and hours and hours to try to say he wasn't dead and to stop taking his money.
It was Washington State Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell today bringing a story from her home state paper to a confirmation hearing for Donald Trump's nominee to run the Social Security Administration. Senator Cantwell told that story today from the Seattle Times about this 82-year-old Washington State resident who was mistakenly declared dead by Social Security, which resulted in his benefits being taken away. He first tried to fix the problem over the phone. And then, as you heard the senator tell the committee there, he went down to the local Social Security office in person to try to sort it out. This is from the Seattle Times. Quote, it was like a Depression-era scene, he said, with a queue 50 deep jockeying for the attentions of two tellers. The employees were kind but beleaguered. Quote, they are so understaffed down there, he said. They think the office is about to be closed down and they don't know where they're going to go. It feels like the agency is being gutted. After waiting for 4 hours, Mr. Johnson admits he jumped the line. He says, quote, I saw an opening and I kind of just rushed up and told them I was listed as dead. That seemed to get their attention. One story, one town, one retired person trying to straighten out one problem with Social Security and finding a Depression-era scene when he did so. But as Donald Trump and his top campaign donor and whatever DOGE is continue to hack away at the way Social Security runs as an administration, the questions about Social Security are moving beyond an anecdote here or there. The question, of course, is how much the agency can take before it just stops working altogether. This is from the Washington Post today. Quote, long waits, Waves of calls, website crashes. Social Security is breaking down. Washington Post today provided this riveting reporting from Social Security offices around the country. Quote, in one office in central Indiana, the phone lines are jammed by 9 a.m. with hundreds of retirees, further taxing a staff of less than a dozen that is responsible for nearly 70,000 claimants across the state. The questions have become predictable. What is the U.S. DOGE service doing to Social Security? Will the office close? Will my benefits continue? The employees with no training yet on the impending changes have few answers. Quote, I hope we're going to be here, the employee tells caller after caller, but I can't guarantee anything. This is what the Post found in Baltimore, Maryland. Quote, in Baltimore, an employee who works on critical payment systems said nearly a quarter of his team is already gone or will soon be out the door. Quote, the reduction in highly skilled staff is already having consequences. The staffer said his office is supposed to complete several software updates and modernization processes that are required by law within the next few weeks and months. But with the departures, it seems increasingly likely that it will miss those deadlines. His team is also called on to fix complicated technology glitches that stop payments. But many of the experts who make those fixes are exiting. He explains that glitches have to get cleaned up on a case-by-case basis. The experts in how to do that are leaving. Quote, we will have cases that get stuck, and they're not going to be able to get fixed. People could be out of benefits for months. Again, that is from the Washington Post today, where they interviewed more than 24 people and reviewed internal documents for this report. That headline again, long waits, waves of calls, website crashes, Social Security is breaking down. Joining us now is Lisa Ryan. She's a reporter for the Washington Post. She's the lead byline on this story. Ms. Ryan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
So you and your colleagues report that, for example, among all the other things, the Social Security website in the last 10 days, or in a span of 10 days, has crashed 4 times. Managers are so short-staffed, they're doing double duty as receptionists. They're taking frontline phone calls. What would you describe the atmosphere like, the mood like, the morale like among the Social Security staffers who are left at these frontline offices?
I think the field staff is extremely anxious, and some of them are also extremely angry because, you know, they're trying to do their jobs. These are not high-paying jobs. And what's happened is that an acting commissioner appointed by Donald Trump has come in and, working with Elon Musk's DOGE team, has moved really swiftly to downsize this agency. And, you know, he wants to get rid of 7,000 employees. That's about a little over 12%. And he's well on his way to doing this. And they've offered early retirement packages, buyouts. Some people have been fired. Others have just quit because they're so frustrated. And this field staff, you know, they take these jobs. These are not easy jobs. And yet, you know, one by one, the field offices and the call centers, you know, that handle this really deteriorating phone service on the 800 line are just, you know, they're really eroding. And it's just got to be frustrating, of course, for the staff and also for all the retirees and disabled people who are trying to get service.
Some of the impact of what Trump has done to the Social Security Administration strikes me as just very granularly specific in a way that is understandable even to people who have no idea how this agency runs. A DOGE-imposed spending freeze has currently left many field offices without paper, pens, or phone headsets at the exact moment phone calls are spiking. This includes the freeze that drove all federal credit cards to a $1 limit. I mean, even if you don't take Social Security benefits yourself, even if you've never been to this kind of agency, you imagine trying to run any sort of customer service operation without having pens or paper or headsets to answer the phone. It does seem like there's I got the sense from your reporting that there's no relief in sight for those types of granular difficulties that make it just impossible to do almost anything. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And I think, you know, we really don't know kind of what the end game is here. The nominee, President Trump's nominee to run Social Security, had a hearing today before the Senate Finance Committee. And, you know, there was a bipartisan group of senators who asked him, look, you know, you really need to address customer service issues, and you need to figure out, you know, how many cuts to the staff and to service are really acceptable, because otherwise this agency is going to grind to a halt. And he said he would address these issues. He talked about using artificial intelligence. He said, well, you know, maybe we do need to reconsider some of these cuts. But for now, you know, it's not just the staff cuts, though, Rachel. It's also policy changes that the acting commissioner in charge has made. And this is all in the name of fraud, fighting fraud. And there's a real obsession of Elon Musk and his team that fraud is a huge issue at Social Security. And, you know, there is fraud. There's fraud in every federal program, and this is a really big one. So the fraud estimates seem really high in comparison, but when you think about the actual spending on benefits, it's not that considerable, less than 1%. But in the name of reducing fraud, what the Trump official who's in charge is now doing is, he's actually made it harder for a variety of people, largely people who can't use computers, to actually do things like verify their identity or make direct deposits. All this now can't be done by phone, but it has to be done by going to a field office if you can't do it online. But, as we've just talked about, the field offices are just fraying. So this is sort of a weird, kind of cycle of doom that is now going on. I don't know how it's going to end.
Yeah, it's not going to end unless they take affirmative action to end it. And it does not seem, there's nothing that we've seen in any reporting that there's any intention to fix any of these things as they keep getting worse. Really vivid reporting, and I know it took a lot of shoe leather to do it. Thank you to you and your colleagues for doing this. Lisa Ryan from the Washington Post, thanks.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. All right, more news ahead. Stay with us.
TikTok. Let's go. Are you ready to fight, Atlanta?
Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff at a rally in Atlanta, Georgia this weekend. He held that rally with his fellow Georgia U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock. A crowd of 2,000 very enthusiastic Georgia residents showed up. Senator Ossoff said at that rally, President Trump was, quote, trying to poison our democracy with fear and intimidation. He declared, Georgia will bow to no king. That was Jon Ossoff's weekend in Georgia. And this was Jon Ossoff's workday today in Washington as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
So, Director Ratcliffe, you were a member of the Houthi PC small group signal chain, correct?
I was.
The discussion included the Vice President's private opinion on the wisdom of proposed U.S. strikes in Yemen, correct?
I don't recall.
It included the private opinions of the Secretary of Defense on the timing of strikes in Yemen, correct?
I don't recall.
Director Ratcliffe, surely you prepared for this hearing today. You were part of a group of principals, senior echelons of the U.S. government, in now a widely publicized breach of sensitive information. You don't recall whether the Vice President opined on the wisdom of the strikes? That's your testimony today under oath?
In that setting, I don't recall.
Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
A national political...
Hold on.
No, you
Let me
hold
answer.
on. No, Director Ratcliffe, I asked you a yes or no question, and now you hold on. A national political reporter...
You can characterize it how you want.
...was made privy
the White
to
House
sensitive information about imminent military operations against a foreign terrorist organization.
Mistake of adding a reporter...
And that wasn't a huge mistake? That wasn't a huge mistake?
Well, I think they characterized it as a
embarrassment.
Joining us now is Senator Jon Ossoff of the great state of Georgia. Senator, sir, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Rachel. Great to see you.
Let me get your reaction to what you heard today from John Ratcliffe and from the other intelligence officials at this hearing today. That was obviously a very sharp exchange between you and the CIA director. But what was your take overall on his testimony? What else you heard today?
Unacceptable and unconvincing. And the key point here is that this kind of disclosure and the use of unclassified devices and systems to discuss the timing of imminent U.S. airstrikes puts American flight crews at risk because it risks the disclosure. And in this case, there was the improper disclosure of information about when U.S. forces would be entering hostile airspace. And that kind of information in the possession of an enemy provides them with an opportunity to better target our air crews. This was reckless, it was amateurish, and it put American lives at risk.
Do you think that people who are involved in this group text over Signal should resign or be fired?
The National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense, based upon Mr. Goldberg's reporting of his inclusion in this chat of specific information related to these air-to-ground operations in Yemen, have breached their basic obligations to protect American national security and American lives, and they should resign.
The line from Trump's intelligence officials, if I could sum it up in terms of the way they've responded to this, is that they're basically asserting there was no classified information in this chat. It seems like they think that kind of ends the conversation. I'm a layman to these things. I don't know anything about what amounts to classified information or not, but just as an informed news consumer, it seems to me that it's unlikely that none of this information would be considered classified information. It certainly seems likely to me that it would be at the least considered to be non-public, sensitive national security information. And I know there are legal implications for classified information and for sensitive national security information in terms of how those things are handled. Is it possible that this discussion that they entered into over this commercial app, not even knowing who all was in the chat that they were all participating in, is it possible that this was criminal?
It is possible. The Department of Defense manual specifies that information about substantial war plans must be classified as secret. But look, putting aside the question of whether this information was formally classified, it included information about a disagreement between the vice president and the president over the timing of airstrikes. It included detailed information about when the United States was contemplating taking these airstrikes in Yemen. And that is exactly the kind of information that a foreign adversary or a hostile foreign intelligence service is aggressively seeking. And it's the kind of information that puts U.S. military personnel at risk when they go out to conduct these operations, and those plans and that timing have been improperly disclosed.
So you held this rally in Atlanta this weekend, 2,000 people there. It's a lot of people, especially when there isn't some election on the horizon that everybody's there turning out for. We played that sound at the top, asking the crowd if they're ready to fight. They sounded very, very ready. We have seen thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans showing up at rallies and town halls. They're starting to be the first large-scale events like the one that you and your fellow Georgia Senator Senator Warnock held this weekend. What are you hearing from your constituents? What is when you're talking about that fight with your constituents, what does that look like to you? What are people asking to you? And what do you think that your constituents should be doing right now to stand up to what the Trump administration is doing?
There is extraordinary opposition energy right now. Outrage at the president's power grab, his attack on the Constitution and the rule of law, his efforts to use fear and intimidation and the power of government to crush the opposition. That's something we've never seen in American politics before. The open door for corruption and the total disregard for anything that ordinary people care about. You know, he's down at his palace in Florida talking about invading Greenland. What does that do for people who are concerned about affording health care or child care? Nothing. So this extraordinary energy, first of all, puts pressure on Republicans in Congress who have very narrow margins to pass their legislative agenda. When they see that this sleeping giant has been awakened and that there is so much popular opposition to this administration, that helps us in the immediate term to defeat their legislative agenda. And it's also what we will have to channel next year to win a landslide victory in 2026. The only path out of this spiral toward one-man rule is to regain power in Congress. And I am the only Democrat running for re-election in a state that Donald Trump won. This will be the biggest Senate race of 2026. And if folks want to help me, they can find out more at electjohn.com.
Senator John Ossoff of Georgia. Sir, thank you very much for your time. I know today was a long day and this is a busy time. I appreciate you taking time out to be here with us.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'll be right back. Stay with us. Abnormally dry conditions are driving multiple wildfires in the Carolinas right now. Nearly 6,000 acres have burned in a largely rural and mountainous part of western North Carolina, which, yes, is an area that is still struggling to recover from Hurricane Helene. Multiple wildfires are burning just across the state border in South Carolina, too. This is actually a live look right now, tonight, at a fire in Table Rock State Park in South Carolina. South Carolina's governor declared a state of emergency this weekend as that fire chewed through more than 1,000 acres. The governors of both North and South Carolina have announced that FEMA is coming to the rescue, luckily. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has approved fire management assistance grants for both of these states, money that will be used to help pay for fighting the biggest fires, because these are the kinds of disasters that are beyond the capability of states on their own. To show the Trump administration's support for everything North and South Carolina are going through right now, Trump's cabinet secretary for the agency that includes FEMA yesterday just blurted out in the middle of these fires, quote, "We are going to eliminate FEMA." Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem took her turn at a Trump administration cabinet meeting yesterday to outline the things she's doing in her agency to please Donald Trump. She used the bulk of her time to claim credit for deportations, but she slipped in one sentence right at the end on something else.
And we're going to eliminate FEMA. So we've got a lot to do, but it's all good, and we're working hard, and we're going to make sure that we're continuing to do exactly what you promised.
To which Trump responded, "That's great, good job. We're going to eliminate FEMA. Oh, yeah." There's been talk in the Trump administration of getting rid of FEMA for a few weeks now, but here it is, tossed off almost as an afterthought at a Trump cabinet meeting while everybody nodded sagely like that's a great idea. And we're going to eliminate FEMA. Okay, next. Good luck with the fires, you guys. Watch this space. Me for now, but I will see you again tomorrow and every night this week at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now it's time for the last word with the great Jonathan Capehart in for Lawrence. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Rachel. I'm going to let you off early. Go home.
Good night.
Thanks, Rachel. It has been 34 hours since we learned that top Trump officials accidentally texted war plans to Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. And just moments ago, a new declaration from Donald Trump about national security breach. It's no problem.
It wasn't classified, as I understand it. There was no classified information. There was no problem.
No problem. So, reporters, do your thing. Ask every single elected Republican, every military expert, every national security expert if they think it was no problem that cabinet-level officials in the Trump administration, including the vice president and the secretary of defense, used an app that you or I could download from the App Store at this very moment to discuss plans about a military strike in Yemen. Today, the government watchdog group American Oversight filed a lawsuit against Pete Hegseth and 4 other Trump officials for using a commercial messaging app in violation of the Federal Records Act because signal messages are stored only on an individual's device with no copy or backup of the messages retained on the Signal system or servers. This means that Signal messages can be preserved by the individual users through screenshots or other means, but once deleted, messages cannot be restored or retrieved after deletion. The lawsuit asks for an emergency injunction for the Trump officials to preserve all materials and to refer the matter to the Attorney General for enforcement of the FRA, preservation of records, recovery of unlawfully removed records, and the recovery or restoration of any deleted or destroyed materials to the extent possible. Jeffrey Goldberg did not release the full message exchange out of security concerns. Later in the hour, we will discuss Jeffrey Goldberg's latest comments on what he plans to do with the yet unpublished group chat. And national security lawyer Mark Zaid will join us to discuss the legal and security concerns. Mike Walz, Trump's national security advisor who created the group chat, tried to make this seem like a tech issue.
It's embarrassing, right. Yes. We're going to get to the bottom of it. I just talked to Elon on the way here. We've got the best technical minds looking at how this happened.
Today, by pure chance, two of the cabinet-level officials in the group chat, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, were previously scheduled to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee about worldwide threats.
You were not TG on this group chat?
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because
Council.
it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now. So you were the John Ratcliffe on that chat?
I was.
Thank you.
My communications, to be clear, in a signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, we will make that determination, because if it's not classified, share the text with the committee.
But some Republican lawmakers are concerned about the national security breach.
I suspect the Armed Services Committee may want to have some folks testify and have some of those questions answered as well. I think everybody has acknowledged, including the White House, that, mistakes were made. And what we want to do is make sure that something like that doesn't happen again.
It's a fact. Classified information was put on by the Secretary of Defense. So I think it's pretty clear.
What do you make of the White House saying that no war plans were shared, criticizing the reporters?
That's baloney. I don't think they ought to just be honest and own up to it.
It's not okay, and any member of Congress, particularly ones that are on important committees, or sensitive committees like Armed Services or Intelligence or Foreign Relations, knows that it's not okay.
And the people who protect America are demanding answers. Here's Senator Alyssa Slotkin tonight on Chris Hayes.
I've been hearing from a lot of spouses today, a lot of family members of folks who are on those missions who are just like, are you kidding me? We are told we can't even talk to our kids about where our loved ones are for operational security. And you're putting this out as the Secretary of Defense. So as far as I'm concerned, the spouses have better operational security on their Facebook groups than the Secretary of Defense has in providing that to our adversaries or anyone who has the ability to hack him.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, a Navy veteran who serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator Kelly, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word. As I said, we are 34 hours into this. 34 hours later, what questions do you have? What do you want to know?
Well, let me start by saying the president said he said no problem.
No problem.
This is a big problem. It is significant. Some of our most classified and sensitive information is when we are about to conduct an operation with U.S. service members. In this case, likely off of an aircraft carrier, but we had ships at sea. With the Houthis are going to be attacked in Yemen. By sharing information on an unsecured platform, you're putting all of those individuals at significant risk. This is the kind of information that our adversaries want. And when they can get it, let's just say as an example, if the Russians were able to get some of this information off of this signal chain, I could see a scenario where they would share it with the Iranians, who would share it with the Houthis in Yemen. And then our pilots coming off that aircraft carrier to deliver bombs on target at a certain time, there's a much higher likelihood that they would be shot down.
You know, Senator Kelly, do you believe Republican senators, like your colleagues on the Armed Services Committee, will just roll over on this? And are they hearing from people on the ground and in the field, as Senator Slotkin has, for whom this is a real safety concern?
Well, I don't know what they're hearing. You heard Senator Kramer of North Dakota tonight talk specifically about this, how this is a problem, and people screwed up. Obviously, they did. And we see folks on TV getting incredibly defensive. I think it's important for people when they make a mistake, especially service members, you got to own up to the mistake. Accidentally putting a journalist on a Signal chat chain is a huge problem. But I would say what the bigger problem is what information was shared. And we don't have all of that information yet. It's clear to me after the hearing that we had today that I don't feel like folks are being totally straightforward with us on this. You could see it. You could hear it when I was asking the Director of National Intelligence specific questions about were targets discussed, were weapons discussed, was timing discussed. Long pauses, a lot of like wheels turning before she would answer, especially with the DNI. So I've got a lot more questions. I want to know what the Secretary of Defense actually said. What was shared? And they might say, okay, it's not classified. Maybe he declassified it. But when you're talking about real operations with real people putting their lives at risk for this country, in my view, there is nothing more sensitive than that information. Hours, possibly hours, before they're about to go feet dry with a surface-to-air missile threat that can shoot them down. That is the stuff that we've got to hold very close.
Happened in Saudi Arabia ahead of a mediated talks that will be happening this week. This push for peace with Russia comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, as you can see, visited the front line of the battlefield this weekend. Meantime, both sides launched deadly new drone strikes overnight, despite agreeing in principle to a limited ceasefire just days ago.
Time will really tell on whether or not this hurts these peace talks. But certainly the tit for tat isn't a boost of confidence for either side right now. But we heard from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said that ultimately whether or not this temporary ceasefire goes into play will be predicated on whether both parties just want to pretend or if they actually want peace.
Years show no signs of stopping as the disquiet over President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's 20-year rule of the country continues to emerge. Thousands of people marched on the streets of Istanbul for a sixth night following the arrest of the city's mayor last week. Ekrem İmamoğlu remains in a Turkish prison charged with corruption. President Erdogan has accused the opposition of provoking what he called a movement of violence, which has seen over 1,000 people arrested as he tried to contain the dissent. Well, our correspondent Mark Lowen, who has spent many years covering the Erdogan presidency, has been on the streets of Istanbul speaking to protesters.
Night after night, this is growing. The biggest street protest here in Turkey in more than a decade after the arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, who they believe was jailed just because he is President Erdogan's main political rival. It is galvanizing the side of Turkey that feels stifled by President Erdogan's authoritarian rule. And they say they are not going to leave these streets until İmamoğlu is out of jail and Erdogan is out of power.
I mean, we're all sick and tired of the oppression that has been going on for such a while in Turkey, and we're all fed up with it. And after all these things that happened to Ekrem İmamoğlu and all the other political people that are sent to jail, we're just fed up and we can't take it anymore. So we're here to defend our rights and to protest against the government.
I'm just here to express my feelings.
And what are your feelings?
I mean, it's bad. I mean, democracy is failing, so it's not a good news for everyone. So I wish that everyone is just reversed to normal and we can just live our happy lives. I mean, I'm just like that.
What is the Turkey that you want?
Democracy, like pure democracy, as everyone wants. Nothing more, nothing else. I just want to live my life. I mean, everyone else thinks the same. I mean, no one wants to be here. Everyone wants to be at their home. I mean, working in their homes and like, I mean, supporting their families, etc., etc. But here we are just trying to bring democracy back.
We're here because of the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. But after everyone realized how bad country's situation is, because of the economy, inflation, and because of the justice, because of the femicides, because of a lot of things. We have a lot of problems about our country. And after that, everyone realized it's not just mayor of Istanbul. It's not just problem Ekrem İmamoğlu. We have a lot of problems in our country.
Protesters, they're speaking to our correspondent Mark Lowen. Well, for more on this, we can speak to Monica Marks, who's Professor of Middle East Politics at New York University in Abu Dhabi. Thanks very much for your time here on BBC News. We were talking there, it's six days of protest now. What do you think that says about the strength of feeling?
It says that there's a huge upswelling of feeling. A lot of Turkish people feel that this is really the last stop on Turkey's political train before it reaches full dictatorship station. For at least a decade now, Turkey has been what most political scientists call a hybrid or competitive authoritarian regime, meaning there are competitive elections, the opposition can win, but the elections aren't free and fair, and it's extraordinarily difficult for the opposition. Media is not free and fair, campaigns are not free and fair, and Erdogan was working for years, since İmamoğlu was first elected mayor of Istanbul in 2019, to foreclose his political future. But I think few people in Turkey thought that Erdogan would go far enough as to put him in prison, to jail him. This is crossing new Rubicons in Turkish politics. It's a humiliation, a harsh indignity that supporters of Turkey's main opposition party, from which İmamoğlu hails, have never faced in their history. So
your colleagues, Mohammed Mansour, as well as Hussam Shabat. Your thoughts right now?
I think there are no specific thoughts to tell you, but it's unending misery, something that we can't really imagine. It's, you know, it's taking a very heavy toll on every single one here, particularly the children. We're here stranded. We're seeing the systematic killing of everyone as Israel is targeting every single one here in Gaza. We're seeing assassinations of journalists, medical staffers, and ordinary people. Also, Israel does not spare anyone in its attacks. And we are hoping, people to hope, after the killing of more than 700 people in the past 7 days, that this will stop. Because I've been talking to people outside and they are very desperate for an end to this. The people are now talking about that we want an end to this genocide. We don't need anything more. And that's what they need, because they cannot really keep grieving more people. They cannot really keep grieving, you know, the losses of their loved ones, the losses of their entire families. That's why when we talk about this particular issue, people don't know what to do. It's an indescribable feeling that they are being killed every single day, that they are being killed every single moment, and that we are into siege for more than 20 days. There's no food available. A lot of people are being taken to the hospital to receive treatment where doctors cannot really give the proper treatment for them, and the medications are not available. Israel has been blocking the 2 crossings, not allowing one single truck into Gaza. And that has really left people on the cusp of imminent death. So you're talking about death, that we are facing death in every single direction, from the starvation, from the relentless bombardments, and from the conditions that we are living under. So it's a very, very horrific situation.
And how, Abu Bakr, are you personally feeling? Meaning your physically, your ailments right now?
Yeah, for me, like, yeah, I've been diagnosed with malnutrition. I know that, and I'm trying to recover. with no means at all. I'm trying to have a way through this, but unfortunately, there is no help at all coming from outside or coming from inside, because I'm helpless towards myself. My family is helpless towards me. The doctors around me are also helpless because there is nothing that I can really opt for, so I can really help myself recover from the trauma, from the illness that I have. And that's not all of me, because I've been seeing around me many of the children who are malnourished and who are desperate for food and desperate for everything, because even the free food that people have been receiving is no longer available. And the same here, we're talking about that there's a scarcity of every food staple inside the territory, like vegetables, like fruits, and those much needed food staples for the population. So how can people really cope with such an incredibly dire situation that people don't have anything, that people have just now resorted to canned food. Canned food is not helpful for us. Canned food is of a very, very bad quality, and that's what Israel has been doing. So as long as the word allows Israel to do so, this will not stop. We need more people to come out in the streets, to close the roads, and to go on global strikes to make sure that this can be lifted, that this blockade and this aggression can be stopped. Other than that, all that you will see is just more killings and mass murders of Palestinians, and all that you will see is more suffering and more painful memories and pictures that you have been keep watching for the past 17 months, and that's now phase 2 of the genocide. So nothing, like no one in Gaza feels safe anymore. No one in Gaza realizes what they are going through, because what they are going through is now going beyond hellish, because this time of the genocide, the 7 days that we have been living through, is a much bigger scale of killing, of bombardment, than we have lived ever before during the past 15 months, phase 1 of the genocide. So we didn't know really what to do. We didn't know how we can really cope with such an incredibly difficult situation. And
I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's renewed all-out killing of Palestinians in Gaza is continuing into its second week, with at least 23 people dead before dawn today, including 7 children. On Monday, an Israeli strike on Beit Lahia killed the noted Al Jazeera journalist Hussam Shabbat. This is Shabbat's colleague, Mahmoud Abu Salameh.
We heard the sound of the explosion near the Indonesian hospital. We rushed immediately at the moment of targeting. At the moment we heard the sound of this explosion, we headed to the place and saw the targeting of our colleague, journalist Hussam Shabbat. We were shocked by the scene. This is our colleague Hussam's car, and this is his blood.
A statement by Hussam Shabbat's team posted after his killing Monday reads in part, quote, "For the past 18 months, I've dedicated every moment of my life to my people. I documented the horrors in northern Gaza minute by minute, determined to show the world the truth they tried to bury," unquote. Shabbat added, "I ask you now, do not stop speaking about Gaza. Do not let the world look away. Keep fighting. Keep telling our stories until Palestine is free." Later in the broadcast, we'll speak to another of Hussam Shabbat's colleagues, Drop Site News editor Sharif Abdel-Qaddous. He'll join us in studio. Separately on Monday, another journalist, Palestine Today correspondent Mohammed Mansour, was killed in an airstrike north of Khan Yunis. In the occupied West Bank, a mob of masked and armed Israeli settlers Monday brutally attacked Hamdan Bilal, the Palestinian Oscar-winning director of the documentary No Other Land. The group of at least 15 settlers also assaulted activists with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. The attack took place in the village of Susia in the Masafar Yatta region. One of Bilal's co-directors, journalist Basil Adra, said the group entered their village and started the assault shortly after residents broke their daily Ramadan fast. Bilal screamed, "I'm dying," as he was being brutally beaten. He was then loaded while heavily bleeding into an Israeli military vehicle. He has not been seen since. We'll speak with his co-director, Basil Adra, and an eyewitness from the Center for Jewish Nonviolence after headlines. In a stunning breach of security protocol, Senior members of Trump's administration unknowingly shared plans to bomb Yemen with a reporter on an unclassified Signal group chat. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, revealed the chats in a piece headlined, "The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans." Goldberg said he did not think the chat could be real until U.S. strikes actually did hit Yemen on March 15th. National Security Advisor Mike Walz created the chat, which also included Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Vice President J.D. Vance. Vance initially argued against the strike, saying, quote, 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez, 40% of European trade does. Vance also messaged, quote, I am not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now, before backing down. In response to the first wave of bombings, Walz posted emojis of a fist, an American flag, and fire. Over 50 people were killed during those U.S. strikes on Yemen, including children. National security experts say using Signal to share classified information likely violates the Espionage Act and federal records law. This comes as the U.S. continues to attack Yemen after Houthi fighters threatened to renew strikes on Red Sea vessels over Israel's resumption of its all-out war on Gaza. On Monday, U.S. airstrikes in Sana'a killed at least 2 people and wounded over a dozen others, including children. This is a local resident who witnessed the attack.
A brutal American-Israeli aggression targeted civilians in a residential area that had no weapons or warehouses, as the Americans claim, only innocent civilians. They bombed an empty basement with nothing in it. The residents of nearby buildings were harmed. Among them, people and even children were injured.
In Ukraine, over 80 people were wounded, including children, in a Russian missile attack Monday on a densely populated area in the city of Sumy, which also severely damaged a school and hospital. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian rocket attack in eastern Ukraine's Russian-occupied Luhansk region killed at least 6 people, including 3 Russian journalists. The latest attacks came as U.S. and Russian officials wrapped up talks in Saudi Arabia Monday over a proposed ceasefire deal between Kyiv and Moscow. Ukrainian and U.S. delegations also met separately in Riyadh. Details have not been made public, but a main issue on the agenda was reportedly the revival of a 2022 grain deal, allowing Kyiv to export across the Black Sea in exchange for an easing of Western sanctions on Moscow. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday rejected an appeal in the landmark legal case Juliana versus the United States. The lawsuit has inspired other successful cases by youth demanding the government take responsibility for the climate crisis. This is Maddow Santos of the group Our Children's Trust, which brought the case.
For nearly a decade, 21 young people fought to hold the U.S. government accountable for fueling the climate crisis in Juliana v. United States. Today, the Supreme Court refused to hear their case. And in a very rare move, the Department of Justice issued a statement calling the lawsuit a distraction. That's coming from the shock and awe administration, actively dismantling environmental laws, the agencies that enforce them, and our democracy. Juliana has spanned 4 presidents. This case isn't political. It's about fundamental rights, life, liberty, and a livable future. That's why young people are winning from Montana to Hawaii. We're not done. We'll see the federal government back in court.
In more Supreme Court news, and a major win for press freedom, justices have declined to hear a case brought by Trump ally Steve Wynn challenging the landmark ruling New York Times versus Sullivan, which in 1964 established bedrock protections against spurious defamation and libel cases in the U.S. legal system. To learn more about NYT versus Sullivan, go to democracynow.org to watch our interview last week with the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter David Enrich. The Supreme Court on Monday also heard arguments in a key voting rights case in Louisiana, which could have a major impact on the future of the already weakened Voting Rights Act. The case centers on whether Louisiana's new congressional map, which created a second majority black district, is unconstitutional. 1/3 of Louisiana's population is black. Last year, using the newly drawn maps, voters elected Cleo Fields, a black Democrat, to represent the district, sending 2 Democrats from Louisiana to the House for the first time in a decade. President Trump threatened Monday to impose 25% tariffs on any country that imports oil or gas from Venezuela. Trump claimed the move was in retaliation for Venezuela, quote, purposefully and deceitfully sending criminals and gang members to the U.S. Also on Monday, the Treasury Department extended Chevron's oil production in Venezuela until late May. This comes as Trump appeared to retreat from his widely touted threats to impose sweeping tariffs across multiple industries starting April 2nd. He told reporters, quote, I may give a lot of countries breaks. U.S. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy resigned from his post on Monday. DeJoy, who has been head of USPS since 2020 in Trump's first term, had recently signed a deal with DOGE to help gut the Postal Service, with plans to cut 10,000 workers and billions of dollars from its budget. Unionized postal workers have been out protesting amidst reports Trump is attempting to privatize the U.S. Postal Service. A federal judge has kept in place a ruling that bars the Trump administration from using the Alien Enemies Act to summarily expel Venezuelan immigrants accused without evidence of being members of the Tren de Aragua gang. Judge James Boasberg said the order should allow the immigrants to fight the accusations in court. In related news, Venezuela's announced it will resume accepting U.S. deportation flights amidst mounting concerns of human rights violations after Trump officials expelled hundreds of Venezuelans to El Salvador's maximum security mega prison without due process. Venezuela's National Assembly President, Jorge Rodriguez Gomez, said, quote, migrating is not a crime, and we will not rest until we accomplish the return of all who need it, until we rescue our brothers who are kidnapped in El Salvador, unquote. Venezuelan immigrants have described harrowing conditions while in U.S. custody.
We have experienced many psychological, emotional, and physical traumas, mistreatment in the conditions in which we were held in the facilities, how we were transferred, and how we were treated in terms of health. They violated our rights. Many of those here were physically assaulted.
And a 21-year-old Columbia University student Monday filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, which is seeking to deport her for participating in Palestinian rights protests on campus. Yunseo Chung is a legal permanent resident from South Korea who has lived in the United States since she was 7 years old. Federal immigration agents searched Chung's university housing earlier this month as they attempted to arrest her. The Trump administration is targeting Chung under a rarely used provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which gives the Secretary of State authority to begin deportation proceedings against any non-citizen deemed a threat to U.S. foreign policy interests, even permanent legal residents like Chung and Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained by federal agents from his Columbia housing earlier this month. Yesterday, dozens of faculty members gathered to condemn Trump's and Columbia's attacks on free speech. This is political science professor Timothy Fry.
Why do autocrats fear higher education? Why are they so hostile to the free expression of ideas? Well, universities are threatening to autocrats because we teach independent and critical thinking, because we train our students to scrutinize evidence and demand rigor, and because we teach students to be skeptical of authority, especially our own authority. If anyone thinks that we can brainwash Columbia students, they've never met a Columbia student.
To see our interview with former Columbia law professor Catherine Franke, you can go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
counsel at the Department of Defense. So, Brian, you just heard Senator Gallego saying one or more of them needs to go. I mean, Walz is the one who invited the reporter into the group. Hegseth is the one who posted the targets and weapons used to target. Obviously, at this moment, it doesn't seem like anyone's going to resign. We'll see. But, I mean, when we say an extraordinary breach, is that the right word?
Absolutely. Don't know of any analog in history that's like this. And when these kinds of war plans are discussed at the Pentagon, there are many rooms that you can't even have the discussion in the Pentagon. You have to go to highly secure rooms. Oftentimes they're windowless because they need to be that secure from U.S. adversaries being able to eavesdrop. If there's a window, then it has to be a highly secured window. You can't bring your device into that room. So they aren't even just like bringing their device into the room. They're using their personal devices to communicate over this commercial messaging app. I've never heard anything like it.
So could anyone in it be in legal trouble? Anyone who was in this group, if they are not in actual chain of command getting fired or resigning trouble?
Absolutely. If we had an independent Justice Department, I'm sure they'd be looking into this. If these were lower level officials, I'm sure they'd be looking into this. The statute is actually one that many Americans can be familiar with. It's the Espionage Act, and there's a particular
Gallego said
provision.
he'd be court-martialed if he'd been
That
doing
resonated with
at
me
least.
when he said that. I was like, yes, that's very likely. That would have been the result. Or when Hillary Clinton used a private server, the investigation by the Justice Department and the FBI was whether or not she was grossly negligent. I think if you hear some of what the members of the Hill are saying, Republicans and Democrats alike, that this was grossly negligent. And that's actually the terms of the criminal statute for having gross negligence in mishandling classified information. And in fact, if it's disclosed to somebody who's unauthorized and on their call is a journalist, that means there was in fact a disclosure.
Right, right. And of course, Secretary of Defense's response was to deny what he did and to disparage the journalist.
Yeah. Let's talk about the story that has exploded over the last 24 hours. Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic writing about this Signal group text chain he was invited to discussing war plans, attack plans on Yemen. There have been people suggesting that a law could have been broken here, Ellie. What law is in play? And what are the right questions to ask pertaining that law?
So there is a federal law that people often look at in situations like this, and it's a rare one because it actually does not require intentionality. Most of our criminal laws require some intentional violation of the law. This one actually applies to gross negligence. What it says, it's section 793, if anyone wants to look it up, but it says that it is a crime to remove sensitive information from its proper place of custody grossly negligently. So I think in terms of the question you asked, what else would we need to know? First of all, is this information sensitive enough that it qualifies? It certainly seems the answer there is yes. It seems this information related to a planned military strike. Second of all, was it removed from or kept outside of its proper place of custody? Signal chat, I'm not a super expert on this, but seems to me to be not the place where this information is supposed to be stored. And then the trickiest question is, was it grossly negligent of the players to do this? And I want to be clear, the gross negligence part wouldn't necessarily be the inadvertently inviting Jeffrey Goldberg, the journalist, into this. I mean, that certainly would be one of the aspects of it. But I think the real question about negligence is just maintaining this Signal chat among top U.S. officials. Would that itself be grossly negligent? So there's a lot of facts we still need to know, but that's the law that people usually look at in situations like this.
You know, to get those answers, someone would have to investigate. Who would be the body investigating here?
Well, that could be the big catch-22 here. Ordinarily, the Justice Department would take a look at this. There's a National Security Division. I think there's a 0% chance Pam Bondi authorizes an investigation, a criminal investigation of this case. You then look to Congress. You saw Lauren Fox reporting in the last segment about how that might go. I mean, the Republicans control both houses. They certainly have the authority to launch a robust investigation. They have subpoena power, but that's the Republican Party. They're the majority now. There's really not a whole heck of a lot the Democrats can do as the minority party. For example, they can't issue subpoenas, for the most part, as the minority party. So I think that's the big question. Who's going to be in position to meaningfully dig down and investigate this? I certainly would not look at the Justice Department, given what we know already about leadership there.
Joining me now to talk about all of this is CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton and Sabrina Singh, a former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary. I'm going to start with you, Colonel. All right, every Republican we just heard Manu Raju talk to said this was a mistake. It was a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. So, Colonel, if you were still serving and you were responsible for an intelligence leaks like this, could this also be a crime or at least something to be court-martialed over?
Yes, absolutely, Sarah. Good morning. There is a very clear provision within the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, as well as under the Espionage Act. So in those particular cases, if I were to do something like that, I would have not only been, lost my job, I would have been court-martialed probably, or at the very least disciplined in such a way that I probably would have had to leave the service, or at least potentially be reduced in rank. There's at the very least disciplined in such a way that I probably would have had to leave the service, or at least potentially be reduced in rank. There's even the potential for prison time for this kind of thing. So careless behavior like this does create a lot of problems, and it certainly does create problems for those who serve in the military if they engage in behavior that is as careless as this.
Yeah, so you're sort of saying the way the military would see this is not just as a mistake, but as something that should never have been able to happen in the first place. Let me ask you this. In your estimation, when you look at all the things that happened, who was on the chat, how the reporter was added, should heads roll over this obvious intelligence breach?
I think absolutely there has to be accountability. And you're not just talking about some government employees. You're talking about the entire national security apparatus, from senior cabinet officials, including the Secretary of State and Secretary Hegseth, being on this chat, talking about classified details on an unclassified text app, and Secretary of Defense Hegseth, who allegedly shared details of an ongoing operation in the chat, including leadership names of who was going to be targeted, the timing and the locations. If any adversary had intercepted these text messages, I mean, we have fighters up in the air that were about to conduct those operations. Their lives are absolutely put at risk with messages like this being disclosed in an unclassified setting. So
at West Bank, the Oscar-winning Palestinian film director Hamdan Bilal was arrested by Israeli soldiers Monday after being brutally beaten by a group of masked and armed Israeli settlers in the village of Susya in the Masafar Yatta region. The attack came just 3 weeks after Bilal and his 3 co-directors won an Oscar for Best Documentary for their film No Other Land. The film follows the struggles of Palestinians in Masafar Yatta to stay on their land amidst home demolitions by Israeli military and violent attacks by Israeli settlers aimed at expelling them. One of Bilal's co-directors, journalist Bassel Adra, said their daily Ramadan fast to stay on their land amidst home demolitions by Israeli military and violent attacks by Israeli settlers aimed at expelling them. One of Bilal's co-directors, journalist Bassel Adra, said settlers entered their village and started the assault shortly after residents broke their daily Ramadan fast. The Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham, who was one of the other co-directors of No Other Land, wrote on social media, quote, "They beat him and he has injuries in his head and stomach, bleeding. Soldiers invaded the ambulance he called and took him. No sign of him since," Yuval wrote. We're joined now by 2 guests in the village of Susya in the occupied West Bank. Anna Lippman is with us, a Jewish-American peace activist from the Center Bassel Adra. He co-directed the Oscar-winning film No Other Land. The film is based on his years of documenting Israeli efforts to evict Palestinians living in his community in Masafar Yatta, south of Hebron. Anna, let's begin with you. You were in the area of the attack. Can you explain exactly what you saw?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so we were called, myself and several other activists, by members of the village of Susya that an attack was occurring next to the elementary school. We drove over from a neighboring village. It took us about 15 minutes to get there. As we arrived at the base of the house that the attack occurred at, we saw soldiers, sirens, all sorts of things at the top of the hill. Myself and 2 other activists exited the car, and we were immediately ambushed by mass settlers with stones and sticks yelling at us. One of the activists was punched in the face and punched in the neck. Another was pushed and hit with a stick. They began throwing rocks at us, and we ran back to the car. They continued to throw rocks. They broke the windshield. They broke the back windshield. They broke several of the windows. And it actually wasn't until Basil and several others ran over and begged the army that was standing there to intervene that the settlers actually stopped. So as this was occurring the entire time, the army was watching but did nothing. And we weren't even able to get to Hamdan at the top of the hill because the army, who was refusing to help us, was also not allowing us to move from the location.
The settlers were masked, Anna?
Yes, they were. There was about 15 or so masked young settlers who just converged upon us in our car.
The IDF issued a statement about the incident saying IDF and Israeli police forces arrived to disperse the confrontation. At this point, several terrorists began hurling rocks at the security forces. The forces apprehended 3 Palestinians suspected of hurling rocks, as well as an Israeli civilian involved in the violent confrontation. The detainees were taken for further questioning by the Israeli police, Anna.
Yes, I mean, that's certainly what the Israeli authorities have said. We know from what's happening in Gaza that they love to say lots of things. When we arrived, Palestinians had already been attacked. As Basil said, this was happening at iftar when everyone was sitting down for their meal to break the fast of not having eaten all day. Hamdan was begging for his life while being injured. And, you know, the double standard is so strong here in the West Bank that Palestinians know if they were to touch a stone in front of the army, that could mean their life or the rest of their life in prison. So the very thought of any of the Palestinians doing this, to me, is laughable. And it's such a double standard because we literally have video proof of the settlers harming not only us, but the Palestinians. The settlers who claimed that Hamdan and others were throwing stones, they have no proof, they have no evidence. They simply told the army this, and that was enough for the army. The police refused to help us, the army refused to help us, but they instantly decided to serve the interests of the occupation and of the settlers.
I want to bring Basil Latra into this conversation. Basil, this is 3 weeks after you and Bilal and Yuval won the best documentary for No Other Land. This conversation should be about congratulating you, because we haven't spoken since you were there in Los Angeles winning this award. But instead, we see this taking place. Describe, from your vantage point, when you came in, what happened, and tell us more about Bilal, your co-Oscar-winning director of No Other Land. We're trying to hear you, Basil. Go ahead.
Home and all of his family, his
Basil,
children,
can you
his mother
start
are worried
again?
for his safety. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm starting again. Thank you for having me. I am here at Hamdan's home, my colleague and my friend. Since long time we're being in the field together filming. I'm here at his home and everybody at his family, including me and other friends, are worried for his safety. He has been abducted since last night, injured. His blood was in front of his home, where settlers and soldiers together attacked him physically, brutally, and abduct him. Until now, we don't know his conditions and what's happening to him, if he gets a treatment or not. Last night at 6 p.m., I arrived in Susia village after I got a call. The water tanks, stabbing them and attacking the villagers, women, children, men. Shortly.
Putin. In the second visit that I had, it got personal. The President Putin had commissioned a beautiful portrait of President Trump from the leading Russian artist, and actually gave it to me and asked me to take it home to President Trump, which I brought home and delivered to him. It's been reported in the paper, but it was such a gracious moment, and told me a story, Tucker, about how when the president was shot, he went to his local church and met with his priest and prayed for the president, not because he was the president of he could become the president of the United States, but because he had a friendship with him and he was praying for his friend. It was, I mean, can you imagine sitting there and listening to
how weak and how stupid are these guys that I'm an armchair psychologist. I'm an armchair foreign policy expert. I just know a little bit here and there. I immediately know that Vladimir Putin knows that these people fall prey to superficial flattery. I further know that Vladimir Putin knows that at the epicenter of a lot of these people that are appointed under Trump, they're the crazy Christian Americans. So he uses the church thing. They're getting played. And the fact that he then goes and repeats it and thinks, oh my God, Vladimir Putin loves us. He's praying for Trump. He's getting this great portrait done. And he says it out loud. It tells you there's just this huge portion of people in American leadership that are dumb and or willfully dumb. And I believe now, and we've thought this for a long time, that the entire outfit, all of them want to dismantle democracy. That is the end game. They want it dismantled. They want a dictatorship. When you start from Pete Hegseth and his group chat, you know, which he's probably raging drunk when he does it, all the way down. And they had the Secretary Scott Bessent in there. Why is he on a war thing? I mean, it's utter insanity.
First of all, the fact that he's on Tucker Carlson's podcast, when we know that Tucker Carlson is a complete Putin loyalist, tells you all you need to know. I'm convinced every day that goes by, the Trump administration is an arm of the Putin government. There's just no doubt about it. And you make such a great point. He has the very best at his disposal with psychological experts, and to be able to go in prepared not to fall prey to Vladimir Putin. And he runs around and has his lips plastered to his ass. And I just want to say, as we saw with the portrait of Trump in Colorado, how mad he was, Putin, he couldn't have scripted it any better. He gives him this gorgeous portrait. I'm sure his hands look big. He looks thin. His makeup is completely blended.
He's a former KGB agent. He knows exactly what he's doing. I want to move on to this last one. So Trump has opened up a White House faith advisor, and this is a tongue talker. This is a grifter, and her name is Paula White. And she's just put out a commercial, and this is just unbelievable. Watch this.
I believe that when you honor God on Passover, starting on April 12th at sundown through Good Friday on the 18th and concluding on Easter Sunday, you can receive these 7 supernatural blessings for you and your house. According to Exodus 23, God will assign an angel to you. He'll be an enemy to your enemies. He'll give you prosperity. He'll take sickness away from you. He will give you long life. He'll bring increase in inheritance, and he'll give a special year of blessing. You're not doing this to get something, but you're doing it in honor to God, realizing what you can receive.
For your special Passover offering of $1,000 or more as the Holy Spirit leads, you will also receive the beautiful 10-inch Waterford Crystal Cross. Don't miss your moment to release 7 supernatural blessings and...
God's going to assign an angel to you. He's going to hate who you hate. This is all this spiritual warfare, prosperity gospel, racket, grift. And I just think there has to be a place post-Trump, if we maintain our democracy, where this is fraud, where this is complete fraud. She knows that she can't ensure that if there is a God, they're assigning an angel to somebody. This is ripping off dumb people and people that fall prey to this religious fear mongering. And look at the top of the ticket. You have Donald Trump, riffraff, knickknacks, and Kash Patel, same thing. And it goes down. And now we've got this nut for $1,000. And so many of these MAGA people, you know, that probably aren't going to get their Social Security checks next month, are going to buy that crystal cross, and they're going to think they've got an angel assigned to them, and that God's going to hate who they hate, and they hate the libs. So then God's going to hate the libs. I just think, are we really a first world country? I mean, is this really, like, this is, people think this is fucking normal. It's insane.
It's insane. And how transparent it is. If you want all these blessings, give us $1,000. They didn't even try to describe it. Like Trump, when he sends emails, it's like, we need your help, do all this. And then once you get into the email, then he asks for money. Like, you can only contribute if you, like, to answer the poll, you have to contribute. This was just so transparent. And here's what I want to know. Who's getting the $1,000? Who gets a cut?
Obviously, Paula White is getting it. And,
she giving Trump a cut?
I doubt it. I doubt that really gets his beak that wet, considering all of the other stuff. But who knows? Maybe. I mean, but she's a grifter. He surrounded himself by grifters. They're all grifting off this same base.
Right.
And instead of taxing billionaires, they want to grift as much as they can. And all right, guys, I'm in Brazil, so pumps will be solo.
In Ukraine have now resumed in Saudi Arabia. President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff says he is confident real progress can be made. The US wants to secure a ceasefire in the Black Sea, building on progress last week when President Putin said he would order a 30-day pause on attacks on energy infrastructure. The US delegation held talks with their Ukrainian counterparts in Riyadh last night, which Kyiv has described as productive. In Ukraine itself, the Air Force says it shot down 57 of 99 drones launched by Russia overnight. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner, who is in Riyadh, explained what it's hoped the talks can achieve.
The Americans are resolutely upbeat. I think they have a rather oversimplistic view as just the complexities of trying to reach even a ceasefire, let alone a full peace deal. You heard there Steve Witkoff, the special envoy of Donald Trump, saying that today, Monday in Saudi Arabia, I think you're going to see real progress. Well, what does that actually mean? I think expectations are having to be dialed back a bit. It's not going to be a full, comprehensive 30-day ceasefire, which the Ukrainians have agreed to, the Americans have agreed to, but the Russians haven't. Instead, what they're focusing on now, a short distance away from here, behind the bougainvillea-clad walls of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, is the technical details of a Black Sea deal. There was a deal in 2022 that allowed Ukraine to export its grain from its ports in the Black Sea without being attacked by Russia. And in return, Russia wanted to export its own farm produce and wanted some sanctions relief. But that deal got cancelled a year later. The Russians pulled out. They weren't happy that the sanctions relief never happened. Russia, remember, is a heavily sanctioned country by much of the world. They want to revive that. Their economy is having quite a lot of difficulties, as is Ukraine's, and they want to talk about that. So I think it's a fairly limited aim today. The Americans are saying, well, if we can at least achieve that, then we can build on that to have a full ceasefire, that protects energy infrastructure, oil depots, things like that, and eventually stop the fighting on land. I'm not seeing any great appetite for stopping the fighting on the land from Moscow, because they are slowly winning there, very slowly, incrementally, pushing the Ukrainians back. So they're not in a hurry to stop the fighting there, but they would like to protect their oil installations, which are getting a hammering from Ukraine's long-range drones.
And there does seem to still be a huge gulf in demands between what Ukraine is willing to accept when it comes to a ceasefire and what Russia is willing to accept. Is there any sense that Russia is moving on its demands at all?
Not that I can see, no. I mean, the Ukrainians, I think, are still very bruised by that horrendous encounter in the Oval Office on the 28th of February, where President Zelensky got a real dressing down from Donald Trump and his Vice President, J.D. Vance. And since then, they've been taking a lot of advice, including from Britain's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, who said to them, look, you've got to keep the Americans on board. You cannot afford to lose US support. The problem is that the American view under this administration, the Trump administration, is very close to Moscow's view. It's quite different to that of the Biden administration. It's quite different to NATO's view, which is very clearly that Russia is the aggressor, that this was an unprovoked invasion by Russia of a sovereign country in 2022. That's not Steve Witkoff's view. He's been making his views known that they are basically almost taking the Kremlin line.
Frank Gardner there in Riyadh. Well, earlier I spoke to Alexander Moresko, Ukrainian MP and chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, on what he hopes will come out of the talks.
We don't have high expectations. We understand that we have negotiations not with Russians. We have negotiations in Saudi Arabia with our American partners. And this is not about political decisions. These negotiations are about technical details. But again, everything depends on Putin, and he's not interested in ceasefire or peace, and he is a major hurdle on the way to ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed unconditionally to Mr. Trump's ceasefire proposal. Russia, Putin has rejected it, and that's why I don't have high expectations.
So what would be a good outcome from these talks?
Well, I think on a positive note, it would be great at least to have partial ceasefire with regard to critical energy infrastructure, our power grid. But again, we have seen many times that Putin makes the promise and then he violates it immediately. That's why even it might be the best result, the best outcome. But again, I remain doubtful.
President Zelensky has said that Vladimir Putin needs to be pushed, in his words, to bring an end to the fighting. How can he be pushed? What do you think incentives can be given to him? A carrot or stick here?
Well, in case of Putin, he takes carrots as a sign of weakness, unfortunately. It doesn't work that way. And the thing is that you don't need negotiations because he will never honor the result of negotiations or some kind of agreement. The only way to deal with Putin is from the position of strength. And the only way to make him to do anything is to put more pressure in the form of sanctions, for example, sanctions against Russian energy, banking, and financial sectors of economy, in the form of secondary sanctions against those companies and countries which help Putin to circumvent primary sanctions, and also by providing more military aid to Ukraine. That's the only way the West can deal with the aggressor.
And what's your view about the US's role here and how they're conducting themselves and their comments about Putin?
Well, we were extremely disappointed and shocked by the recent statements by the President Trump envoy, Mr. Witkoff, because he's parroting Putin's propaganda, and we are very concerned about this. It's totally unacceptable what he said, and it's Putin's lies. It means that he's either totally unprofessional and not fit for his position, for his role, which is very important, or he's like acting in the interests of Putin. So I'm confused personally about these statements, and I think that President Trump, who should make very clearly that the United States will continue to support territorial integrity of Ukraine, because it has always been U.S. foreign policy, and it's in the best national interest of the United States.
Ukrainian MP Alexander Morasenko there.
Fact. Fresh meat.
On getting a ceasefire agreement in place in Ukraine. But at the same time, key agreements have been reached between Russia and Ukraine. It says Russia and Ukraine have agreed on several points, including ensuring safe navigation of vessels in the Black Sea, helping to facilitate prisoner exchanges, developing measures to implement the agreements between President Trump and President Putin to ban strikes on energy facilities in both of those countries, and to work toward achieving a durable and lasting peace. Let's turn now to CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, we have these agreements reached between Russia and Ukraine, but how could those steps be effective in an effort to end this war?
Yeah, well, I'm just reading through some of the details now, and the devil will be in the details, because it's sort of broad strokes. I think it's important when they talk about opening up those shipping lanes, because this is an area, and I've been there myself, especially in the early part of the war. It became a chokehold. There was a lot of fighting going on there. Russia was trying to take over Ukrainian ports, but it was kind of shooting them both in the foot because they both needed those shipping lanes open. It also means that the Ukraine, at least in theory, if not in practice, won't open fire on Russian ships in the straits near the Black Sea. That's very important because they have been vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. As far as the other cooperation levels there, you know, there is some reason to see a glimmer of hope by virtue of the fact that there is progress to be made. You know, for several of these things, they've come away with neither side making any progress at all. At the same time, however, the fighting is continuing there. So I think what we want to look at, there seems to be willing from the Ukrainian side and some progress going forward. And the Ukrainians have said all along, Zelensky said, we're not the ones staying in the way of peace. It'll be interesting and imperative to see where Russia stands on some of these more critical terms of it. Because we have to remember, you know, rewind just about a week ago, President Trump essentially asked Putin for a ceasefire, having gained one from President Zelensky. He came away with something a little bit less than that, saying we're not going to go after each other's energy infrastructure. And aside from an attack that night, that has held. So again, this is progress, and we haven't seen progress in 3 years. So I think this is a glimmer of hope in this, you know, carefully worded statement that we got today.
Okay, and we'll see what else comes next. Charlie, I know you've been listening to that Senate hearing. Still that big question of how, I know, I see you shaking your head there.
To ensure safe navigation in the Black Sea. And we're also getting comments coming out of Ukraine. President Zelensky says Ukraine's understanding is that this agreed ceasefire is effective immediately following the announcement. He says the agreement does not specify actions if Russia breaks the ceasefire. Ukraine will appeal to the US directly if that happens in such a case. And if so, he says he will ask Trump for weapons if Moscow breaks the ceasefire. Zelensky also says that the US offered a more comprehensive framework in the minerals deal. Such a document is likely to require ratification by Ukraine's parliament. And says that Ukraine is yet to study the offer, but it does not include nuclear power plants. This is the minerals deal, we believe. President Zelensky also says that Ukraine is considering US facilitating Russia's agriculture exports as a weakening of sanctions. He's also quite hopeful. He says the Paris summit could yield specifics on possible foreign contingents in Ukraine. And Zelensky says he hopes the US will release, in the end of the day, Russian narratives about Ukraine are false. So Zelensky still asking for more in terms of the narrative coming out of America. More from the Kremlin. US will help restore access to global market for Russian agricultural and fertilizer exports. We knew that already. The Kremlin is saying this depends on lifting sanctions, restrictions, and other financial organizations, and this also should include lifting sanctions on companies producing and exporting food and fertiliser, and sanctions on ships should also be lifted. Right, well, I'll take a break and bring in Professor Michael Clark. So quite a lot to digest through there, the finer details, the finer points of this deal. Yeah. Ukraine very clearly, wants to make it clear to the world what it has agreed to.
Yeah, and Jane, what I was struck by there, that they said, OK, freedom of navigation agreed in the Black Sea, fine, let's see what that means, but that looks as if it's agreed from now, from this instant. But there was a phrase used twice there, which is doing an awful lot of heavy lifting afterwards, said we will work towards. So one, they're going to work towards more port access for Russia, whatever that means. And secondly, they're going to work towards a ceasefire over energy infrastructure strikes. Not that they've declared a ceasefire, they'll work towards it. Well, that was where they were yesterday. So what we're being told is on this issue, OK, freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, again, as we said about 20 minutes ago, not clear who enforces that, if anybody, not clear who monitors it. And obviously, the Ukrainians are saying, OK, well, we will be watching this very carefully, and we hope the United States will watch it carefully. And if Russia breaks the terms of this, we hope that you'll think that through. Also, I mean, what the Ukrainians are saying about the minerals deal, they make it clear that they were only talking about Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That was just something that Trump mentioned. And yet some of his officials say they were talking about all nuclear power plants. They clearly weren't. I mean, they're just making this up as they go along. But the minerals deal is now in a slightly different place, and it will have to go to the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, and it has to go to Congress. So, I mean, they can, Zelensky and Trump can sign what they like. It doesn't become real until both parliaments have ratified it, and both parliaments will pick away at it, you bet, because they've all got special interests. It'll be a long time before this minerals deal becomes a reality. I mean, by a long time, I mean some years before there is anything to show for it. But at the moment, it's political theatre. It's a theatre of a deal that somehow brings the United States a bit closer to Ukraine for the future.
President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin to halt attacks specifically in the Black Sea and on energy infrastructure.
Now, the ceasefire will take effect immediately. NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins us now. So, Kelly, there you're on the White House lawn. What do we know about this deal so far? Has the White House spoken out yet?
Well, they've put it out in a printed statement, and this has been a very tenuous set of circumstances where they've been trying to get to some sort of partial ceasefire. And this is an incremental positive step that the White House says is looking good based on conversations that have been happening in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So this is a narrow piece where the Black Sea, which is a critical point for international commerce and so forth, that they would stop fighting in that area. They would stop fighting that targets energy infrastructure. So there's a lot of other things that could still be aspects of a hot war here. But this is a sign of progress. And notably, the statement says that the U.S. will work to free up markets for Russia. Remember when Russia illegally invaded Ukraine 3 years ago? The world in many different forms, including the United States, put sanctions to block Russia from benefiting from being a part of the economic marketplace on the global stage. And so this is indicating that they would reopen some of those avenues. That's obviously a great benefit to Russia. And certainly for Ukraine, they want to see fighting reduced and, at least in this area, brought to a halt. So far, it appears that President Zelensky has agreed as well. But we've seen how in these volatile circumstances, even bits of good news, we have to tread carefully until it's implemented.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Kelly, this deal, of course, it's coming shortly after a U.S. delegation spent days there with Russian and Ukrainian officials in Saudi Arabia, and they were essentially ironing out the specifics of a ceasefire. But what do we know about how those discussions ultimately went? How did we get to this place?
Well, we'll have to get more of a readout on how they got to this final conclusion, but they have put in the work. We saw that there was a direct conversation between President Trump and Vladimir Putin by phone, where there were discussions about what they were hoping to achieve. We also saw how President Zelensky came to the United States had a testy meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office and other top officials, and then after that tried to work to repair some of the disagreements that erupted in that setting. Clearly, the president has said he wants to see an end to this fighting, but he's been reluctant to put a lot of the blame on Russia, even though the international community has done that. We're at a point where he's trying to get to an answer of bringing about peace. The big questions will be Zelensky and his side say that Russia has not shown a credibility in keeping agreements. That's why part of this, positive to be sure, but needs to be monitored carefully.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC.
Director of National Intelligence. They were both part of that chat. You know, they both admitted to being part of that chat. Somewhat reluctantly, particularly Tulsi Gabbard, who said in the beginning, you know, she refused to be acknowledged in terms of her involvement. And she kept making the statement that says, I don't want to discuss this in this environment. Pressed more by the senator saying, well, wait a minute, why don't you want to discuss this? If it was classified information or sensitive information, we understand that. But what you're arguing, and what Secretary Hegseth has argued, is this wasn't classified information. This wasn't a war plan, that this has been amplified or exaggerated by The Atlantic and Jeff Goldberg. We have seen some of that, you know, some of what The Atlantic has made public. And that in itself sort of hints at sensitive information. Certainly I would be reluctant to share that kind of information if I were to be Jeff in that particular chat, because he's talking about weapon systems, weapons packagings. He's talking about the sequencing of targeting. These are very critical bits of information, and I would imagine they would be classified bits of information. I mean, I'll just tell you, for example, okay, we use the signal system. I use them with sources here, right? So the military, the Pentagon uses it. They use it between service members. It's approved in that manner. No way do you speak about even something as innocuous as troop movements. Even that would be considered classified. You would no way share any of that information about an ongoing battle, about target acquisition, about the sequencing of those targets, because it's, aside from being outlawed, they're told specifically not to use systems like Signal for that kind of information. I mean, they'd be fired, or worse, court-martialed, because it gives the adversary or the enemy the opportunity to essentially know where you're coming. The first wave of attacks is always going to take out the targets that might put your own forces in a vulnerable situation. So you want air defenses out of the way. You want radar bases out of the way. You want command and control centers out of the way to cripple the adversary's capability of striking, you know, your personnel, your pilots, fighter jets, etc. That's the kind of information that not only you don't want falling into the hands of somebody like the Houthis, who perhaps don't have the capacity or capability to fire back at a fighter jet flying at, you know, 35,000 feet. However, Iran, if they were to get across that, or, you know, Russia or China, then it becomes critical mass, right? Then it becomes a national security issue. And one thing that was interesting here, and I don't want to overstep here, because they're treating it so carefully because they know this is all going to be addressed. Now, I don't know whether there's going to be an investigation, but as the meeting went on, or as that briefing went on, they started to put more, I don't know if the blame is the right word, but more responsibility in the hands of the Secretary of Defense. I mean, John Ratcliffe, CIA director, said that original classification, so the person who essentially owned the information that was going into the chat, that would have been classified or released by the Secretary of Defense. And they mentioned a couple of things. I get it here a lot. There's something called controlled unclassified. So that is where you have information that isn't necessarily available to the public. It might be for the edification of journalists that we can't then publish or broadcast on. So it's controlled classification. It'll be interesting to see if that's the sort of designation that they use for that information that came out of that chat. Again, I've only seen what you've seen. The stuff that's out there, the reports that's out there, However, The Atlantic said, we've seen a lot more than that, and they wouldn't feel comfortable. Interestingly, one of the senators said, if everything inside that report or inside that chat is considered unclassified, would you be okay with the original report coming out with all of that chat?
Right.
All of what he learned. And they said they weren't entirely comfortable, not even from a legal position. And I think there's the rub. That's where we're going to start figuring out, was this innocuous? Was it unclassified? That's where we're going to get the answers.
Bearing witness, you had exclusive access to this maximum security prison. Talk more about the treatment of this man deported from the United States. What shocked you as someone who's worked in war zones?
Yes, thank you. The story, as any story, is complex. The reality is that in El Salvador, the MS-13 gang members are truly terrifying. I've been here working on a book for a year, and I've interviewed these men in the prisons. I've read their files, and it's after many travels around the world, it's coming to this country, which is now totally safe on the streets, that I've been given my nightmares. And so I had a certain expectation when the Venezuelans were coming. I'd actually flown to New York last November and talked to officers in police intelligence about the new developments in the gangs. And I thought that these guys were going to look like MS-13, and they didn't. And part of the protocol of bringing people into the prisons is set in El Salvador, for better or for worse, because of the level of violence that these guards and police are dealing with. And yet it's still difficult to see that system.
I want to ask you about one individual you chose to write about. You write, one young man sobbed when a guard pushed him to the floor. He said, "I'm not a gang member, I'm gay, I'm a barber." I believed him. Inside the intake room, a sea of trustees descended on the men with electric shavers, stripping heads of hair with haste. The guy who claimed to be a barber began to whimper, folding his hands in prayer as his hair fell. He was slapped. The man asked for his mother, then buried his face in his chained hands and cried as he was slapped again. Talk to me about what it was in his person, in his essence, that made you believe him.
It's a hard thing to talk about, as you know, in this world of reporting, and that especially when you're reporting on the suffering of others. Unfortunately, I've developed an innocent, but this one person, it didn't correlate with his moment. That would be his defense, to say I'm a gay estilista, a gay stylist, which could be interpreted as barber for women. It didn't correlate to the moment. Those aren't the words I would choose to ask somebody to help me. Not in that environment. And so his tone, his persistence to keep talking when he was told not to talk, just led me to question and wonder that the veracity of his claims, that there might be something there. I sure hope and believe that the El Salvadorans will find out. I hope so. That's where he is right now.
There's this one particular photo of a detainee being taken off the plane. You write that the faces of these Venezuelans plucked from America show they didn't expect to arrive to an ocean of soldiers and police assembled to apprehend them. I mean, the images are dystopian. I cannot imagine their horror and their surprise.
Yeah, I think if you're a gang member, and it's a dark world, that world. I mean, that's an understatement. If you're a gang member, yeah, what do you expect? I mean, it's an army, and they probably can stomach it, as horrible as it is. But if you're not, if you're innocent, I mean, you're already terrified. You're on a plane. You don't know where you're going. And to come off the plane and to see, something that looks like it's out of a sci-fi movie, must be unsettling. And that's, again, that human side that grabs me. And I'm not trying to pass judgment on anybody. I'm just writing what I saw and what was there. And I think if I were coming off that plane and I was innocent, I'd be trying to run back on the plane. They actually tried to overtake the plane, at least one, when they landed.
These folks have been stripped of their due process. They have been stripped of their humanity. Thank you for capturing these images and forcing all of us to bear witness. Philip Halsinger, thank you for your time. Quick break for us. We're going to be right back.
يا جماعة هاكد روح خلاص يابا الله أكبر الله
أولاده أصبح ألاقي أولاده جوز ميتين الحمد لله أولاده جوز ماتوا يا عرب اصحوا حرام عليكم حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل في جنة النياحة
An Israeli airstrike has targeted a hospital in southern Gaza, killing at least 2 Palestinians and injuring several more. An Al Jazeera journalist was standing by to go live outside Nasser Hospital when it was hit. Fire broke out on the second floor of the medical facility, but has been brought under control. Hamas has confirmed one of those killed in the attack was Ismail Barhoum, a member of the group's political bureau. Well, Al Jazeera's Hind Hudari joins us live now from Deir al-Balah, that's in central Gaza. Hind, so what more details are emerging about this Israeli attack on Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza then?
Well, the Israeli army attacked the second floor of the Nasser Hospital. The Nasser Hospital is located in Khan Yunis in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. Ismail Barhoum, a member of Hamas, was actually receiving treatment as he was injured by the Israeli forces, and he was receiving treatment in the hospital. Along with Ismail Barhoum was a 16-year-old Palestinian that was also killed in the same attack. We saw the hospital burning with flames alive as the Arabic Al Jazeera reporter was standing in front of the building. Now, according to doctors in Nasser Hospital, they said that the department went out of service due to the fact that the destruction is massive and the flames of fire, it took them hours to turn down the fire. Now, what also we need to know is there were at least 8 Palestinians injured in this attack, and all of these Palestinians injured are people already injured inside the hospital. Now, hospitals across the Gaza Strip are overwhelmed. There's no medical supplies or medicine as the Israeli forces continue to close the Karim Abu Salim crossing for 21 days now. Now, the situation is also escalating in different parts of the Gaza Strip, especially Beit Lahia in the north and Rafah in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip.
All right, Al Jazeera's Hind Hudari there in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Hind, thank you. Let's bring in Dr. Feruz Sidwa. He's a trauma surgeon and is in Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Dr. Sidwa, just talk us through what happened and where you were when the airstrike happened.
Yeah, I'm a trauma surgeon, and most of my patients are actually on the male surgical ward, which was hit. But thankfully, I wasn't there when it happened. I was on the 4th floor in the emergency medical. Actually, no, sorry, I wasn't. I was on the 4th floor in the ICU. looking at a guy who needed to go to the operating room immediately. That's exactly when the bomb hit. We were about to roll him into the operating room, but of course, when the bomb hit, the whole hospital stopped, and basically we didn't do anything for probably about an hour. Thankfully, he survived long enough to get into the operating room. We just finished with that case. But the whole second floor male surgical ward, like I said, is where most of my patients are, has been destroyed. Actually, the young man who was killed, I believe he was 16 years old. He was one of my patients. I operated on him, I believe, on March 18th. I did an abdominal operation. He probably would have gone home tomorrow, but now he's dead.
Yeah, and given that level of damage and death and destruction that you're talking about, I mean, Israel says they were targeting a member of Hamas. I mean, what's the hospital's response to that?
I can't tell you what the hospital's response is. I'm a volunteer, so I don't want to speak for Nasser Hospital, certainly. But I can tell you, as far as I know, I follow the Israeli press a little bit. Benjamin Netanyahu has been ill recently. Well, he stands accused of genocide. And nobody thinks Hamas can bomb a hospital just because Benjamin Netanyahu happens to go there. That's crazy. This is completely insane. You don't bomb hospitals. Everybody knows that. It's part of this, the oldest part of international law. The first Geneva Convention was signed in 1864, and that was the first creation of international law, at least in the West. And it's specifically about not obstructing the work of physicians and nurses. This is barbarity. This isn't how reasonable, civilized people behave. It doesn't matter what they were trying to do. You don't bomb a hospital no matter what. That's not how it works.
Yeah, and the pictures of the fire we saw were very dramatic indeed. Just tell us a bit more about the damage that's been done to that specific part of the hospital on the second floor and why that's important.
Yeah, the male surgical ward is destroyed. It does not exist anymore. It will have to be completely rebuilt. The whole hospital smells like smoke right now, but the ward is the entire electrical system was destroyed. Every door is blown off its hinges. Most of the windows are shattered. The ceiling.
Well, today, if they reach 100 degrees, would be the earliest that the city has ever recorded triple-digit heat. And that's really saying something about what we're facing this season as we head into the spring and eventually the summer season for the location. Remember, Phoenix, some of the standard equipment on ambulances and fire trucks last season were body bags with ice to help cool people's internal core temperature down. It's not just Phoenix, it's other locations. Palm Springs, up the West Coast. This is where the heat will build through the next coming days. And you can see how it shifts from the West Coast today and tomorrow through the Rockies for Wednesday and Thursday and eventually spreading to the east. And you'll see the temperatures start to rise for various locations from the West Coast all the way to the deep south. John?
Awfully early to see these temperatures. All right, Derek Van Dam, thanks so much for being with us. Sarah.
All right. A 6-year-old girl who had been missing for more than a month was rescued after a traffic stop in Kansas. Both adults were taken into custody. Authorities say the girl was coached to give a fake name, but she eventually told the trooper who she really was. All right, this morning, a Florida man, they are always messing with my state, is charged with aggravated assault after police say he drove his car toward a group of people protesting outside a Tesla dealership in Palm Beach, almost hitting some of those protesters with his car. The sheriff's office says he drove his vehicle up onto the sidewalk and then forced a bunch of people to jump out of the way. Thankfully, they did because everybody is okay. An employee at the dealership says the driver then went inside to tell them that he stands with Tesla, and then he walked out to be arrested. All right, a picture for the ages. This is Texas, y'all, and yes, those are steers on the run on the freeway. 6 of them managed to escape from their trailers on their way home from the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, shutting down traffic and weaving around.
Israel's renewed all-out killing of Palestinians in Gaza is continuing into its second week, with at least 23 people dead before dawn today, including 7 children. On Monday, an Israeli strike on Beit Lahia killed the noted Al Jazeera journalist Hassam Shabbat. This is Shabbat's colleague, Mahmoud Abu Salameh.
We heard the sound of the explosion near the Indonesian hospital. We rushed immediately at the moment of targeting. At the moment we heard the sound of this explosion, we headed to the place and saw the targeting of our colleague, journalist Hassam Shabbat. We were shocked by the scene. This is our colleague Hassam's car, and this is his blood.
A statement by Hussam Shabat's team posted after his killing Monday reads in part, quote, "For the past 18 months, I've dedicated every moment of my life to my people. I documented the horrors in northern Gaza minute by minute, determined to show the world the truth they tried to bury," unquote. Shabat added, "I ask you now, do not stop speaking about Gaza. Do not let the world look away. Keep fighting. Keep telling our stories until Palestine is free." Later in the broadcast, we'll speak to another of Hussam Shabat's colleagues, Drop Site News editor Sharif Abdelkadous. He'll join us in studio. Separately on Monday, another journalist, Palestine Today correspondent Mohammed Mansour, was killed in an airstrike north of Khan Yunis. In the occupied West Bank, a mob of masked and armed Israeli settlers Monday brutally attacked Hamdan Bilal, the Palestinian Oscar-winning director of the documentary No Other Land. The group of at least 15 settlers also assaulted activists with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. The attack took place in the village of Susia in the Masafar Yatta region. One of Bilal's co-directors, journalist Basil Adra, said the group entered their village and started the assault shortly after residents broke their daily Ramadan fast. Bilal screamed, "I'm dying," as he was being brutally beaten. He was then loaded while heavily bleeding into an Israeli military vehicle. He has not been seen since. We'll speak with his co-director, Basil Adra, and an eyewitness from the Center for Jewish Nonviolence after headlines. In a stunning breach of security protocol, senior members of Trump's administration unknowingly shared plans to bomb Yemen with a reporter on an unclassified Signal group chat. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, revealed the chats in a piece headlined, "The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans." Goldberg said he did not think the chat could be real until U.S. strikes actually did hit Yemen on March 15th. National Security Advisor Mike Walz created the chat, which also included Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Vice President J.D. Vance. Vance initially argued against the strike, saying, quote, 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez, 40% of European trade does. Vance also messaged, quote, I am not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now, before backing down. In response to the first wave of bombings, Walz posted emojis of a fist, an American flag, and fire. Over 50 people were killed during those U.S. strikes on Yemen, including children. National security experts say using Signal to share classified information likely violates the Espionage Act and federal records law. This comes as the U.S. continues to attack Yemen after Houthi fighters threaten to renew strikes on Red Sea vessels over Israel's resumption of its all-out war on Gaza. On Monday, U.S. airstrikes in Sana'a killed at least 2 people and wounded over a dozen others, including children. This is a local resident who witnessed the attack.
A brutal American-Israeli aggression targeted civilians in a residential area that had no weapons or warehouses, as the Americans claim, only innocent civilians. They bombed an empty basement with nothing in it. The residents of nearby buildings were harmed. Among them, people and even children were injured.
In Ukraine, over 80 people were wounded, including children, in a Russian missile attack Monday on a densely populated area in the city of Sumy, which also severely damaged a school and hospital. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian rocket attack in eastern Ukraine's Russian-occupied Luhansk region killed at least 6 people, including 3 Russian journalists. The latest attacks came as U.S. and Russian officials wrapped up talks in Saudi Arabia Monday over a proposed ceasefire deal between Kyiv and Moscow. Ukrainian and U.S. delegations also met separately in Riyadh. Details have not been made public, but a main issue on the agenda was reportedly the revival of a 2022 grain deal, allowing Kyiv to export across the Black Sea in exchange for an easing of Western sanctions on Moscow. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday rejected an appeal in the landmark legal case Juliana versus the United States. The lawsuit has inspired other successful cases by youth demanding the government take responsibility for the climate crisis. This is Maddow Santos of the group Our Children's Trust, which brought the case.
For nearly a decade, 21 young people fought to hold the U.S. government accountable for fueling the climate crisis in Juliana, the United States. Today, the Supreme Court refused to hear their case. And in a very rare move, the Department of Justice issued a statement calling the lawsuit a distraction. That's coming from the shock and awe administration, actively dismantling environmental laws, the agencies that enforce them, and our democracy. Juliana has spanned 4 presidents. This case isn't political. It's about fundamental rights, life, liberty, and a livable future. That's why young people are winning from Montana to Hawaii. We're not done. We'll see the federal government back in court.